Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us. And we are just really glad to have you in our weekly community meeting. I met Mary through past work experience, and Mary is the mother of five kids, two boys with on the autism spectrum and three girls. So she's going to share with us from her wealth of knowledge. And we'll do questions that are here from people here on the call first. And then I've got lots of questions once we work through those. So, Mary, I'd love to turn it over to you, and maybe you can give a little bit of an introduction beyond what I just said.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. So glad I'm able to be with you guys tonight. It's kind of a privilege, but I'm a little nerve wracking because I only can go off on my own experience. And so I hope I'm helpful to share with you guys today. But like Sarah said, I have five children, three girls, two boys, and both of my boys are on the autism spectrum. My oldest son is 22 and my youngest son is 16. So we've kind of been through the young stages of children with disabilities, and now we're moving on to more of the adult side of things, which is a bit more challenging. There are different challenges, really, as you guys will probably all either experienced or will be experiencing. So I'm just here to answer some questions the best of my ability. We can talk about a lot of the, I think you all probably understand that a lot of ups and downs but also really great joys and wonderful parts of being a parent with children that are just a little bit different. So I will, I guess, open it up, Sarah, to questions, unless you want me to talk about something else. But
That's great, Mary. Thanks. Colleen, do you have any questions to get us started?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for sharing what you know. I'm really looking forward to it. I have a daughter on the autism spectrum. She's 12. And, I'm always interested in looking forward because it always seems like school up to age 18, things are pretty, like you always, I guess there's a lot of community around that. But I always hear you want to plan for transitioning early, all of those kinds of things. Like, what are the things that you think are most important to kind of keep in mind as you're sort of moving towards it? Because I'm a little scared. I'm a little scared that things will sort of all of a sudden will fall away in terms of supports. And then I'll wish that I knew ahead of time what I should have been laying the groundwork for.
right, that's a really good question. In fact, that's something that I think that we thought of really early on. It's like, okay, when they're 7, 8, 9, should we really be thinking that far in advance? And it is one of those things that's kind of in the back of your mind, but you're really can't do anything quite yet. You're kind of waiting. And I know for my oldest son, who's 22, that didn't really look promising to what was going to be available when he was older. He is more high functioning, but he still is kind of like, he's in that in between, right? Like he doesn't need like necessarily daily care, but he also needs supports. He won't be able to live on his own yet. And so he's kind of in that gap, right? And, even at 16, I was like, there's just no way he's going to ever be able to be on his own. He might just be with us forever. And so you have to kind of account for that a little bit. So I think it's good that you're starting now to kind of think of those things. And I think what we've found is there's so many more options, and there's different options for every level of disability. If I are on the spectrum, I'll talk about specifically of what the needs are for your child, right? So if they're going to need more one-on-one care, there's programs for that. If they're more of just needing those life skills and that filling in the gaps, there's programs now for that. And it's been really exciting to see the community really pay attention to that need of once they get out of high school, what's next. I remember for us, we were pretty nervous as my son was like a junior in high school. And we're kind of like, now he got all the services you could think of in school, he has full on IEP and all of the services that come with that in public school. But he was still struggling, it wasn't easy. But I remember we were sitting there on our couch one day, just like almost like flabbergasted, like, we don't know what the future looks like for him, and we hadn't found anything. And then we did find something, and it was like a friend of a friend heard us talk about something at our church, because we were doing something with the autism community at that time, and she runs an ARC and locally to us, and she was just piloting a program for these kids called Transitions, and it's to fill in that gap. It's that program where if they want to go into work, or maybe they want to try to go to college, they're going to fill in the gap with the services where high school falls off, you know. And I just remember that was just such a relief to know that there was somebody else thinking about it, and somebody else is doing something about it. And so we had to then at a junior year kind of prep him for that, and get him ready to be kind of on his own in that program. So I would start looking now for things that might be available, knowing that there may be more available once she's at that age, you know. And there's ways to kind of like, a lot of it's just Googling or finding people that have had been in programs like that. Autism Society is great. Autism Speaks has some resources. A program like this that Sarah's doing is going to be really valuable, because you're going to have parents, again, from every walk of life and in every stage of life, that will be great resources for you. But right now, I wouldn't think there's a ton to do other than just do some of your research. Just kind of look at what is available, and then what are her needs, and what do you think her needs might be at 18 or when she graduates.
Okay, that's great advice. And I like how you said thinking about what's available, but also really being clear about what her needs are going to be. And of course, it's hard to know projecting that far out, but it's so helpful to be always thinking about what are the actual needs.
Right, because some kids need more of that physical care, right? And so you've got to find a program that might be able to fit that. Some need more of the social, emotional care, finding a program that fits that. And so there's different programs for every need.
Okay, great. Thank you. If I could follow up with another question, something I'm really struggling with is sort of helping my daughter find autistic community. She's struggles to fit in amongst peers in school. But I do think if she were to be around people who may share some of the same, maybe social deficits, or some of the same intense joys about certain things, that she would just sort of find her crew. And at this age, I feel like it's tougher. Are there any thoughts you have on ways to help find a line in,
Yeah. So I guess I'll ask you a question, like, how aware is your daughter, and where is she kind of emotionally of understanding her autism?
She understands she understands that she's autistic. She is I'm trying really hard to make sure that it is she has a sense of positive identity about it. But I want her to understand herself and understand how to ask for things and advocate for herself and be proud of who she is, which is tough for any seventh grader in any walk of life, right? But she's aware, and she's really feeling the difference. She's feeling she understands, like, it's not like she's blissfully unaware when something happens. If anything, she tends to magnify it and get very embarrassed about not responding in a way that was appropriate. So she's trying really hard, but she is aware.
Yeah. Okay. Because I think that's something that, like, as parents, there seems to be like this certain age, and I couldn't even nail it for everybody because it's going to be different, but where they kind of are noticing, okay, I'm a little bit different, and you're trying to explain to them why, but they don't really even feel like they understand what autism is, or whatever that learning disability or challenge might be. They just know they're different and they're struggling. And I think you're right in that at 12, it's a huge transition like time period for any kid. And to find those friends and those social connections is super hard unless they've already had their kind of group, that they've kind of stuck with. For me and my kids, it was kind of like their cousins. So it was family always, that they connected with. But my boys, it's been a constant challenge socially with friendships. And I don't want to make that sound like a defeatist way of thinking about it, but I'll just tell you that it's still hard. For us, we are people of faith, so we're in a church community, and that was really helpful for us because we found that there was a lot of empathy and understanding in that community that we didn't find elsewhere. And not that you can't find it elsewhere, it just is where we found it because that's where we spent a lot of our time. There are kind of like meetup groups or social groups within some of those organizations, like your local Autism Society chapter may have social groups. The other thing I found is that my boys both we have a college here. We're in Albany, New York. We have a college, St. Rose, and they have a special education department. And they had a social skills group that was run by their students with a professor that was overseeing it, but it was kind of like some of their classwork. And we were able to get them into some of those social groups. So it was like friends, but it was also, they were also learning skills at the same time. And so there may be some local colleges near you that their students that could actually be helpful to kind of find those social groups for you and for your daughter. Because it'll help her have skills, but also friendships. And it'll also help her learn how to have friendships. Like, how do you have a conversation with a friend? What do you ask them? Do you ask them, have to ask them some questions about themselves and maybe not always about you and your own interests. And it kind of gets them a little more out of their shell. So that might be a resource for you too, is find a local college that has a special education program that might have some of those groups.
That's an awesome idea. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Mary. I want to follow up on something you were mentioning. I think it was your older son you were talking about on an IEP. And I'm curious how you've navigated with both sons inclusion in the educational environment.
Right. So my oldest was in a self-contained classroom early on in kindergarten. He did kindergarten twice. And so it was a fully integrated classroom with just other kids with special needs. And then once he got to first grade, I really pushed for him to be in an integrated classroom because what I was finding is that he was learning some of the behaviors from some of the other kids that weren't so good. Because a lot with autism, they do a lot of imitation. And so he was just imitating some of the bad behaviors that were happening. And so I really pushed for integration and had to push for services. Fortunately, we were in a really good school district. And so they didn't really, we didn't have to kind of fight too hard is what I guess, there's certain things that you had to fight for, but they were pretty accommodating with services in our district. And then both of my boys have been integrated into regular classrooms with either push-in services where there's a teacher's aide, usually in elementary. As they got up to like middle school and high school, it's not push-in anymore. There's usually they have to leave and do something else, either with they'll do counseling or social skills training. But they've had speech and OT and PT and you name it. And it was a little bit hard. And I wanted more push-in services than pull out, because if the pull out, they would miss things in the classroom and it would really frustrate them. And so I would always have to advocate more for push-in services if they would let me. But I'll tell you, every IEP meeting, I mean, you're in there and you're kind of like having to navigate through it. And I think the hardest for me was when they got to middle school and they started to try to almost declassify the kid to get them off the IUP or get less services. And so if you're getting into that situation where they're trying to declassify and they're trying to take that, well, he doesn't really need it this much anymore, and you think that he or she does, you got to like push in for that. Now there are parent advocates, at least in New York State, you can have a parent advocate come with you to IEP meetings, and they kind of know the ins and outs of the services more. And so you can have them come in and advocate. They have to offer you a parent advocate, at least in New York. You have to have a parent advocate. If you request one, they have to give it to you. And if you're really passionate, you can become a parent advocate, which is kind of fun too. Does that answer your question, Sarah?
Yeah, you were definitely touching upon those. And when they were trying to declassify in middle school, did your son already have a diagnosis? What was the
Yeah.
basis of declassifying?
Yeah, so that they do that, but they try to do it in a not, they wouldn't necessarily take a diagnosis away. They would just say he's progressed enough where we don't have to offer them certain services. So they kind of want to kind of get it down where they don't have to keep giving him the services. So if you think your child needs those services continued, that's where you have to speak up.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
sometimes that takes on the parent side of having to go get different other evaluations that you can bring back to the school district and say, no, we've done this evaluation, and so here it is, and we are requesting more services or continued services.
Thanks. Hi, Lori. Welcome. If you have any questions, feel free to jump right in.
Hi. Sorry, I don't have my video going tonight, but it's good to be here and be listening and be able to just glean some knowledge.
Yeah, glad to have you here. This was, I think, a little bit of what Colleen was touching on, but are there things that you wish you had done sooner, or maybe moving away from regrets, things that you advise parents to do at the earliest possible convenience, sort of building on what you were saying around thinking longer term and what plans you might want to be putting in place now?
So yeah, I mean, not necessarily a regret, but I definitely wish I did it differently. Especially with my first son, I was super protective of him. So I think I actually, and my husband and I both have talked about this extensively, I should say, we both were very protective and didn't want him to get in uncomfortable circumstances or things that might hurt him. Socially, I'm talking about. And I think that really inhibited him growing faster as far as social skills, because I wanted to make sure I kind of hibernated him a little bit, to protect him. And things like I didn't let him go to camp, with other kids because I wasn't sure he was going to be able to handle it, or I didn't think that the staff was going to be able to handle it. Looking back on that now, I remember he did cross country in high school, and he was supposed to go to a cross country camp. And I was in the driveway with my husband. He was all packed, ready to go. And I'm like, nope, he's not going. I just don't trust he's going to be able to handle it. He's going to get isolated. He's not going to be able to, I was just so nervous. I'm like, we're not taking him. And I remember my husband was so good for me. And he's like, nope, he's going. And it is what it is. If we get a phone call, we get a phone call. We'll go get him, but we got to let him try. I'm like, oh, okay. So I let him, and he was a 3-day camp. So it wasn't like super long. And he comes back, and he talked about all the stuff he did. When we picked him up, people were showing us pictures of like all the activities he was doing with them. And he was the life of the party, and he was doing karaoke. And I mean, and I was just like, what? Like, who is that kid? And so I would say as a parent, you gotta let them out and do new things. And if they fail, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. And it'll probably help them grow more in those areas socially and in community than not. There's always things that we can talk them through in the end. But to really let them have those experiences, even if it's really hard to do so, because most of the time they're going to be okay. Now, I know there might be parents on here where because I'm talking specifically about autism, but if there's parents on here that are with kids with different physical needs, I know that might not be as easy to do, but even if it's like getting them into a group or social space, let them do it. It might be a little uncomfortable, but that's how the kids learn. And so we actually chose to make sure our kids were in school, in a public school. And I know a lot of parents will homeschool and stuff, and there's nothing wrong with homeschooling. I want to make sure that's clear. I feel like it's great for your child if that's what you choose to do. But for kids who have social issues, they need to be socially with other kids. That's the only way they're going to really learn. And again, it's going to be hard. But if you guys remember too, when you were kids, school wasn't easy. Like middle school was awful. Like I hated middle school, but we got through it. We're okay, and if you are really aware of watching their mental health, you can get them through it. And if it means getting a counselor or a therapist for your child, do it. Like their mental health is going to be crucial for them going forward. And so whatever you need to do to get their mental health to a place where it's good, and that means being in community with other people, not isolating them, that's going to benefit them in life overall. So I think the biggest regret we had was we didn't allow them to do as much as they probably could have, because they're very resilient and they surprise us every turn.
I love that, Mary. It also brings to mind a question, Lori, I think you've brought up in the past, of like when invariably somebody makes a foolish comment, what do you do? How do you navigate that? And I think it's like kind of two-pronged. So one, when it's just said towards you, something thoughtless about your children, but then two, when your child's there and hearing those comments being made. And I'm thinking particularly at a young age, how you helped your boys navigate that, since I think that's kind of where the question was coming from, of a child hearing something that maybe they haven't even fully processed, or something that is they realize is thoughtless, and trying to help them process that. So wherever you want to take that, that's kind of.
Sarah, thank you for bringing that up, because it's funny. I was actually just thinking, oh, I should ask about that specifically. And yeah, my son is 3.5, and very astute. We're not seeing a lot of people, so I haven't had to navigate that too much yet, but he's starting to notice. And yeah, and we've had friends or different people just make comments, and I know he's going to start understanding them more and more.
So just to clarify, you mean statements about their disability?
Yeah, about their disability, about their needs. My son is mostly like complex medical needs. Mm-hmm. And so the biggest outward, like visible sign is his size. He's very small stature, and like he's 3.5 and he can fit in 12-month clothing still. And so that's probably the biggest. We're noticing like that he can't eat certain things, or that he has to have, he has like a medical device on his arm. He needs to have his blood tested, just things like that, that people just make offhanded. And, we've had a lot of, even previous to COVID, oh, he's so small. Oh, how can he walk at such a young age? Like, he's got to only be 6 months old. And I'm like, no, he's 18 months. And obviously at that age, he didn't understand it, but those sort of things come up, and make my son in particular is easily embarrassed, like a very shy kid. If I give correction, he gets embarrassed very easily, even if it's done gently. So not wanting that to color how he sees himself, yeah. In the long run, that he could see himself for who he was made to be, who God made him to be, mm-hmm. And not the comments that people make.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, because people say some of the craziest things, even if they're well-meaning in a way, and I think even with our typical kids, they can say stupid things. I mean, I'm only 4'9", I still get stupid comments from people about my size. I want to like seriously.
I'm 5 feet, so I'm right there with you.
There you go.
I'm like barely 5 feet if I stretch. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I would say that if it's a stranger, someone you don't know, like you saw in the grocery store or whatever, and you don't really know them, you know, for you, you've got to just chalk it up to they just don't know, you know. But if it's and you can talk to your son about that later, like, well, they just don't understand, but that's okay. And you always go back to affirming. And I'm sure you already do this. We always want to affirm our kids, but I wasn't afraid to say to my kids too, of like, you are different, you know, you are different, but you're also very special and you're unique to you. Like there's only one you and there's only one me. And so affirming that, of like not saying like don't worry about it, or you know it's okay, they're just, you know, whatever. You want to acknowledge what it was for them and even acknowledge how they might be feeling. Like, did that statement hurt your feelings? Does that make you sad? Like, I think the earliest we can help our kids name what they're feeling, that gives them more confidence and power over those emotions. And when they can name it, then they can address it. And maybe it's just they're frustrated. A lot of times they'll say angry, sad, mad, right? Or happy. But let's help them give them more language on what that feels like. And you could even share your own feelings. And this is what I do with my boys too, is that I let them know that that was really hurtful. Like, that hurts me when people say that. But I also know who God made me to be. And so I've got to kind of just have an understanding that they don't understand. So if we're doing the affirming and we're helping them name how that feels, that gives them more confidence and ownership over their feeling. And that way they can kind of work through it. If it's a family member or someone that you're really close to, like friends, you need to have a sit down conversation with them and say, it's not okay that you say that about my son. And this is why. It really hurts us as a family. It hurts my son. And you can say, like, you may not realize that you're doing that or saying that, but this is what it's doing. And so the closer you are to a person in relationship, you can have those conversations. If it's just people in Walmart or Target, you've got to kind of like realize that there's just going to be people like that in the world, and there's nothing we can really do about it. I do know that we can't protect them from all of that either. Like, there's no way we're going to be able to protect our kids from all of that. So we then have to like teach them how to respond to it, because that's the only thing that we're ever going to be responsible for, is our response to things. We can't control what people say or do, but we can teach our kids how to handle it. And I think helping them name that emotion of what they're feeling, what that's like, and then they're able to express it, that'll help them, especially later on when they're teenagers. It helps with because I know for kids on the spectrum, anxiety and depression, it can be very prevalent. And so if you can help your kids understand what they're feeling, have their emotions said, and then how they respond to it, that will help with that anxiety depression issue later on. Is that helpful, Lori?
That's very helpful. And, I think I've done some of those things, but it's just kind of affirming, like, okay, kind of on the right track, and how to take it a little bit of a step further too. And yeah, and have some of those, what are going to be tough conversations with people at times, but that it's worth it and important to do it. So right. Thank you.
And don't let it so the worst thing I think for parents like this, and at least for me, was I would let those things affect me where I'd pull them back. That's where I got to protect them. I can't let them, experience these things because it's going to be too hurtful. That's what you have to be careful of, right? Because you don't want to pull them out of the world, because they've got to succeed in the world at some point. So we've got to teach them as kids to be healthy adults, right? That's our job as a parent, is like, right. How do we have adults that can function? And I'm talking function, social, emotional, okay, in life, not necessarily like just physical needs, but because we got to teach them that now. We can't wait till they're teenagers. So at 3, it's going to look different. It's going to be a little more simplified. But then if you're building on that now, when you've got a teenager, you're going to already be ahead of the game for them. And I think that also as parents, being able to share what we're feeling is helpful, because a lot of times we don't share with them that something hurt, or we're sad, or we're really frustrated about something. We've got to name our own emotion first so we can help them learn what that is.
Those are great points, Mary. Thank you. Welcome, Christine. We're just asking questions. So if you want to jump in with one, go right ahead. Otherwise, I've got a list of these that I'm working through as well. So jump right in if you want to. You touched, Mary, upon relationships, and particularly in the story with your son going to cross-country camp. And I think that's been a theme that we've also dwelt on throughout this pilot. How you navigate that relationship with your spouse, particularly when you disagree about something having to do with your kid. And really any thoughts you have around how you navigate co-parenting a child with special needs would be great to hear.
Sure. You know, there's statistics, and I don't know what the statistics is, but that there's a higher divorce rate of for parents who have children with special needs. It is extremely stressful and very challenging. And I think I spoke to you about this a little bit, Sarah, before, of like, there's a level of grief that you might go through as a parent when you first find out. At least for us, there was of finding out our kids, you know, had special needs. So there's this loss of what you thought your child was going to be or could be, right? And so you're now having to navigate that grief process. And I didn't know what it was at first. My husband actually figured out that he was going through a level of grief with the boys. And so we were able to talk about that. And I think that if you can, as a couple, if you're parents, that you really, again, it goes back to navigating how this whole process is affecting you, and start naming those things early. And then start naming those early with each other. And that helped Ben and I have at least some understanding of where we were coming from things. Because for me, I'm just like, okay, I found a problem, I'm just going to go fix it. Like, okay, he's got this diagnosis. All right, now what? What are we going to do? What's the next steps? Boom, 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 boom. And I didn't actually allow myself to sit in some of the grief or the frustration that I was having with it, or the loss of what I thought having boys was going to be like. And even when I saw other friends with boys who were doing all these activities and sports, and my kids are not sports kids. I mean, he did running, but that was because it was an individual sport. He, you know, he didn't really have to be on a team. He needed no real coordination, you know, but so I had to kind of work through some of that frustration and grief myself, but then we had to work through it together. When we did that, and we were able to kind of like figure that out for each of us, then we could come together and understand each other better. And then when one of us was having like a moment, because these are hard, like you're worn out or something is just hit the fan with them, or they've had just a temper tantrum or something's gone wrong, the other one can kind of understand where you're coming from. And it just helped us care for one another better. When we bottle it up and we don't share it with our spouse, that's where that anger, frustration comes in, and then you kind of can throw in the towel because you just don't know where else to go and you don't know what to do with it. So Ben and I have always been really diligent on trying to keep our relationship strong. And that meant sometimes that we needed to get away and find help so that we could be a unified front, because we did disagree on some things and paths to take, but we could sit down and talk it out to a degree, and we would have to compromise a bit if there was some things that I wanted to maybe think was best for the boys and he wasn't so sure. We had to figure that out, and we didn't always agree, but we would defer, you know, to basically the one that had the best argument. Just had to go with it. But we did mostly agree on their care, so I can't say we had any major disagreements. But we did it because we decided we were going to do this as a team, and we were going to, if we didn't agree, we were going to talk it out until we figured it out. And then it's also good to have people outside of your marriage, friends, if it is a counselor, a therapist, to kind of work some of these things out through, these emotions through with, that you can kind of like vent a little bit and you're not putting it all on your spouse.
That's helpful. I especially appreciate the idea of understanding how you're feeling and then being able to share that with each other.
Yeah, that's a process that takes a little bit. That means we actually have to stop for a minute and actually ask ourselves what we're thinking and feeling. And the biggest thing is like, you just have to be honest. You just have to be like brutally honest with yourself. Like if you are just mad and like angry that how could I have a kid that isn't perfect, whatever perfect is for you, okay, just name it. Like get angry, get mad. Like it sucks some days. Like this is hard work. But then once you do that, it's kind of like a release. And then you're kind of like, okay, it is frustrating, it sucks, but we're still here. I'm not leaving my kid. So we're just gonna keep moving forward, and we're gonna try to find the best things about the situation that we possibly can, because our circumstance isn't going to change, but how we look at our circumstance can.
Yeah. That's great. Christine, let me try asking you to unmute, seeing if that kind of gives you an option, or you can type in anything that you want to type in and we'll read it. Let's see, other questions from folks? Any follow-up questions on what Mary has been sharing? Something that you and I talked a little bit about, Mary, was your identity, and that kind of overlaps a little bit with what you were just sharing about. And I remember you saying something like, my identity is not the mother of a child with special needs. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think it was because Sarah, you had asked me, I think just something I learned through the process. And I'll tell you, just I think in general, being a mom or a parent, mom, dad, we can get lost in that identity. I know for me, even right now, I'm like almost empty nest. You know, my youngest is 16. I've got kids that are leaving for college at the end of the month. And, you know, it's just a big life change. But with the boys, you know, it just becomes all consuming, right? Like that's all you think about. That's all you worry about. That's all you're doing, especially when they were younger. You're just all caring for all their needs. And so you can kind of get lost in that. But for me, learning that it was okay to be something more than just a parent with a kid with special needs. That's not only who I am, and that's not only who they are, right? They're not only someone who has special needs. That is just a part of them. As it is, like, for me, that's only a part of who I am. It's not my whole being. And so I had to kind of reimagine life and get rid of my ideal life and kind of go, okay, this is the life that I have, and who am I in it, and what part am I going to play, and do I want to be consumed and only thought of as this person, or do I want to actually recognize I'm more than that? And I only say that, not that it's like I'm lessening my role as a parent with a child with needs, but we can kind of get lost in that. It becomes our whole world. And I'm going to tell you, as I'm having my kids kind of like move on, if you can go into like this spiral of like, what now? You know, what do I do now? Um, Also knowing that my boys will probably at some degree always need me. Like there will always be a level of care that I'm going to have to give them. And so you have to kind of reimagine yourself, right? And then learn how to be okay with that. Does that make any sense to you? I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah, it does. I'm thinking practically, did that take any certain forms for you when you're thinking, when you're talking about reimagining yourself or like kind of defining what role you want to play in your life?
Yeah, so it's the finding help, really, because this can be really exhausting, the day in and the day out, and and it kind of still is. Like, you know, my kids are older, but man, they are, oh, it's emotionally draining. You know, I don't have a lot of physical needs for them right now, but I am emotionally drained by managing their emotions and managing, their needs in that way. So taking breaks, finding your group of people that are just your people, that you don't have to be mom and you don't have to worry about it. And then for me too, it was like just recently I went back to school. I was like, okay, I gotta start doing something different that I want to do for me. And some of you may already have full-time jobs and a career, and that's great too. And that is helpful. But for me, I was a stay-at-home mom for 20 years. You know, I worked here and there, but like for the most part, I was home with the kids. And so now for me, it's like, okay, I've got to find me in all of this. And even along the way, taking those breaks and finding those things that you can just enjoy life, and find those activities or their people. Um, and I think the hardest thing for me was I didn't have a lot of friends that had kids with special needs. So the challenge there is that they don't always understand your challenges, right? And so they're talking about all their kids and all the things they're doing. I'm like, well, my boys are just, this is not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen for them. So and I don't think they ever really get it. That's another thing. I don't know if you guys all feel that way, but as much as people can be caring and try to understand what life is like as a parent with special needs, they just don't really understand it. You know, the day in, the day out's tough. But there are really great people. So I don't want to say that there isn't, and they're really kind people. But I had to find something other than that. And I had to find that out other for my other kids too, because I have 3 kids that are neurotypical. So I had to be their mom too. I couldn't just be the mom of the boys that needed my attention all the time. I needed to care for my girls.
Hi, Mary. Sorry that I am coming in late. Tell me how many kids you have. I missed that at the beginning, obviously.
I have 5 kids. I have 2 boys that are on the spectrum and then 3 girls.
Thank you. So I too have 5. And so there's a varying mix in there as well. And I think that what you said is, just super helpful, only in the sense that I'm in the same boat. Like when you say, the people that you're doing life with that don't have any special needs in their family, they can be kind and, compassionate when you're in the middle of talking or in a situation, but like they don't do life all the time like that. And so they don't really get it. And so, but then again, we don't really do life with people that have special needs. So we're in organizations, or we're in programs that help with those kind of special needs areas, but like life as we know it every day, we're not in the same kind of environment as our, normal day-to-day families that we do life with. So I do feel like that's hard. And again, not that they're not compassionate, but it is like they can be on that night or that specific environment that we're in, but not all the time. They don't get it. So it doesn't feel, they don't feel the magnitude. And I'm not saying they should, but, you know, it's kind of like, why can't you do this? Or let's get involved in this. And so, you know, just having to manage the yes and no's of what we can do and what we can't do, you know, they don't get. And so I do feel like that can be a struggle. So it sounds like a little bit like what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it is really difficult. You can't really explain it, right? Like you can't explain what life's like on a daily basis because at least for my boys, a lot of it's like unseen. Like, you know, there's some behavioral issues, sure, but most of them are like emotional issues that I'm dealing with, the high anxiety, the panic attacks, for me now having kids that are older, I mean, my son went through even this state of depression recently and like talking about suicide and like, I'm having to navigate that. And this is daily stuff. This isn't like, oh, this just happened and you can move past it. It's like, he has a therapist now. Like I have to be really mindful of his mental state, you know? And not that you don't have to think about that with neurotypical kids, but it is on this heightened level that you really can't even explain because, and for my boy, it's moment to moment. I mean, they could be great one moment and the next moment, I mean, someone's having a meltdown, you know, because the bread got put away wrong or, you know, they didn't shut the door. Like my son has this thing with shutting doors and like, he'll just get up in the middle of whatever and just start shutting doors. And so when we have company over, they're like, what is he doing? I'm like, he doesn't like doors open. So he just closes all the doors. Or he runs, you know, through the house every night at a specific time. Griffin is running through the house and he's 16. And so how do you explain that? Like, and for us, we're kind of used to it. So we ignore it. Like, we're like, okay, kind of stimming. He's just running. He just needs to get some energy out. But then you have people over and they're like, is he okay? And I'm like, oh yeah, he's fine. He's just running through the house again, you know? And so life is normal to us in our own home until someone else is either in our home or we take our kids out of our home. And then you see this glaring difference and you're like, oh, whoa, okay, you know, and then you feel like you have to explain everything. But it is tough. And it is tough. And I get what you're saying, Christine, is that we don't have a lot of friends that have kids like with needs. We have just friends with kids, you know what I mean? And so that can be challenging too, because I don't know about you guys, but you can be in the constant state of comparison of like what life looks like for them versus you. And that's a dangerous trap to get into.
It is.
And so you got to really kind of pull yourself out or be in communities like Sarah's providing, which is, I want to learn and have a community with other parents of learning what they've walked through and then how I can walk through and just know that we're not alone. And you're not weird and you're not abnormal. It's normal for you. And this is your normal. And it's going to be different. Like my normal is going to be different from yours, Christine, but there's going to be similarities that we can kind of connect on, you know, and just say, it's going to be okay. We're going to do this. Our kids are going to be okay. And we're going to get through this.
You may have already talked about this, so if you have, then don't repeat it because I can listen to the video later, but or the audio. So when you say, like, sometimes, you know, when people are over and you're, you know, one of your sons is doing something like just closing the doors as an example, like, what does that look when you say, like, sometimes I have to explain? So what happens when you don't explain? Like when you just keep doing life and you're like, I'm not going to take the time and energy to explain this. And so I'm just going to try to engage and keep the momentum going without having to explain. I mean, do you do that, or do you always kind of revert to, I'm going to explain this?
That's a good question.
That's a personal opinion. Like, you know, do I stop and explain, or do I say, you know what, I am not going to explain. It's exhausting and it's tiresome. You know, yeah.
I hear you. No, I don't always explain. I do it only when like he's being really disruptive and people are kind of
Okay.
like stopping and like, now most of the people that come to my house though are people that know my boys already. So I don't have to explain, you know. It's when we kind of meet new people and they don't really get it, you know, or people that don't normally kind of come over. But no, I don't usually explain it unless he's being really disruptive.
Okay.
Or they ask a question, which sometimes people do. And I don't mind answering.
Which the questions, I like the questions. I like the questions like, hey, can you help me understand this? Because I would be the one that says, hey, help me understand this because I want to understand your son better, or I want to understand your daughter better. And so for me, I'm all about the questions because I want to know, and I'm, you know, that's important to me to know the individual. But yeah, I just wondered. And I feel like it's less at the house than it is, you know, my own home versus, you know, going somewhere else, and not even necessarily in new people, but I guess new situations. So if, you know, we're always at the same house, then it's not a problem, but going to somebody else's house, and now even if it's the same people, now it looks different. So yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I think one thing I do get frustrated with is at some point, I don't want to kind of keep bringing up his disability as like, I have to tell you what's
Right.
wrong with him. Like, I don't want to have to keep doing that. So he's
Right.
different and he does weird things sometimes. Like, why
Right.
do I have to keep, like, you know me, you know our story, or even if you don't, like, I'm not going to keep doing it. We were actually away in Florida this past week, and it was kind of like a work event for my husband, but they invited the family. I was like, oh God. So I was like, okay, we can do this. We can do this. So we were at a restaurant. My son, he was the only one that went. It was my twin girls who are 18 and my son who's 16. And he's pretty introverted. Like he kind of keeps himself most of the times on his phone or, you know, whatever. And we're at this dinner and we're all at this big table and he's sitting next to me and everybody's talking, everybody's having good conversation. Even my girls are talking and he's just sitting there on his phone, or he has like little Minecraft toys that he plays with. And so he's kind of engrossed in those. And I don't think anything of it because that's just Griffin. Like that's just what Griffin does. You know, he brings his toys with him and his little like squishy things. So if he gets really anxious, you know, and I remember someone at the table was like they were really confused. They're like, is he okay? Like, is he not feeling well? Like, and I'm like, that was the moment of like, do I explain this? Or I just say, no, he's fine and just move on. You know what I mean? Like, and I think it's any given moment, you've got to decide, I guess, kind of what mood you're in. Like if you want to really get into it with
Right.
people. But like you, Christine, like some people really are genuinely interested and want to learn. So I will do that with people because I think the more that people ask those kind of questions for genuine interest of learning something is really helpful, because the more that we can bring awareness to what our kids need and how they are different and how maybe the next time they see someone like that, they can understand better and be more empathetic and caring, then yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it then.
Right. Right. Well, in that kind of situation, like, you know, just listening to what you're saying about the whole, you know, Florida dinner, I'm like, he's happy and he's, you know, in his, you know, whether he's in his own little world and enjoying his space, he's not disruptive and he's not having a, you know, any kind of outburst or, you know, he's not frustrated. And so I'm thinking, like, why would you ask that? Like, he's perfectly fine.
Right.
So, right. Yeah. So I think you're right. I think that, you know, there are people that are interested in wanting to understand more, and then there are people that are like, that just feels way too hard for my life because we aren't doing that, and so, yeah, and so.
Yeah, I find that most of the time, it just makes people uncomfortable. So our kids with needs, whatever it is, physical or behavioral, emotional, it just, people don't know what to do with it, right? Either they haven't
Right.
experienced it or it's just odd or it just makes them uncomfortable. So just kind of knowing that, like it usually just makes someone uncomfortable, you can kind of just like, well, be uncomfortable. Like, I mean, what am I going to do?
No, I do think there is something about that. Like, again, if you are interested and want to ask the questions, I want to engage with you. And if not, then like, yeah, you're just going to have to walk through this and be uncomfortable. And, because like, my child is also a human being. And so might be different than yours or even my other children, but he or she is a child and like important. And yeah, just, beats to a different drum or whatever, like whatever the terminology you want to use, but right.
Yeah, that's good.
Thanks.
Yeah, the phrase that was coming to mind was it's not my job to make you comfortable. And then I sometimes engage in those conversations if I have the energy to, and depending upon who the person is. And then there are times when I just don't have it in me. But I loved, Mary, what you were saying of like, hey, that is an opportunity, or maybe you were hinting at this, to advocate on behalf of kids broadly with different needs, that you're opening people's eyes to recognizing and appreciating differences, rather than just othering kids
Right.
that show up differently.
Yeah, that's good.
Do you have any final thoughts or words that you'd like to share?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I was a little nervous about this whole thing. I don't do this very often. But I also know that, I have sometimes questioned like, why me? Like, okay, we had our first son on the spectrum, and then I had two girls and then another one. And I remember the second time I got the diagnosis of a second child, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I almost swore, I'm sorry. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This is two in the same family, both of my boys. Like, and so you can go kind of in your little pity party and go, why me? But at the same time, I also know that God has a plan. I don't know always what that is, but he made me Hayden and Griffin's mom. And so I'm going to do the best that I can to be the best mom for their needs. And it's going to look different than even my other kids. But I'm going to try to do the best I can. I'm not going to do it perfect, and that's okay. I'm going to make mistakes, and I have. But I'm just going to just do what I can. And I think that I have learned so much from being a parent with a kid with special needs than I probably ever would have with a kid that's typical. And I love my girls, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anyone's better. But they've taught me patience. They've taught me compassion. They've taught me empathy. And they've taught me to be more gracious towards people, because we don't know what people are walking through. Just as people don't know what I'm walking through on a daily basis, I don't know what everybody else is walking through. So they have taught me so much already that I have to hold on to those pieces to get through the really tough days or moments. And so I would just want to, I guess, end with just an encouragement that you're all like warriors. You're out here fighting the battle of motherhood, which is hard on its own, but you throw in anything that's different and it's even harder. But you guys are great, and you're doing it, and you're here, and you're showing up, and you want to learn more. And if you're here, that means you want to be the best mom possible, and that's all you can do. And on the other side of it is don't be too hard on yourself. Give yourself some grace, give yourself some rest, and you'll be a better mom for it.
Thank you so much, Mary.